Logo. National Museum of Natural History. Smithsonian. Text. Hot topic. The Grandmother Hypothesis and Human Origins featuring Kristen Hawkes, Distinguished Professor of Anthropology, University of Utah. February 19, 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. ET. Logo. National Museum of Natural History. Smithsonian. On the left there is a photo of a smiling woman in front of several photos of chimpanzees. A speaker's video appears in the top right. Text. Briana Pobiner.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Hot Topic program, the first for 2026, The Grandmother Hypothesis and Human Origins with Dr. Kristen Hawkes. My name is Briana Pobiner, and I'm a paleoanthropologist and educator at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History. I'm a brown and gray-haired woman in a blue shirt wearing headphones in front of a Zoom screen with an African savanna photo with grass and an acacia tree behind me. Whether this is your first time joining us for Hot Topics or you've attended before, we are so glad to have you here. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. This discussion offers closed captioning. You can turn the captions on or off via the CC button, which should be located at the bottom of your Zoom interface. We are in a webinar format. We can't see or hear you. So as you have questions, please go ahead and submit them to the Q&A box, which is at the top or bottom of your screen. It looks like two speech bubbles. So we can sort through as many of those questions as possible. The Q&A time really flies by. The Q&A box is also where we might share any relevant links during the program, so keep an eye out there. We'll start with a presentation by our speaker, Kristen Hawkes, and then I'll join her here to take your questions. During the presentation, I will also write answers to some of your questions, at least any that I can answer, as will another member of our behind-the-scenes team, Dr. Ryan McCrae. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker. Dr. Kristen Hawkes is Distinguished Professor of Anthropology at the University of Utah. She uses observations of foraging and social strategies among hunter-gatherers to help explain what happened in human evolution. Her studies of life history evolution began with ethnographic findings in two large field projects studying the behavioral ecology of hunter-gatherer populations in Paraguay and Tanzania. Results from those foundational projects suggested that, contrary to long-standing expectations, men's hunting was aimed more at status competition than at provisioning mates and offspring. Grandmothers played the key role in providing for youngsters when the mothers of those youngsters bore their next baby. These findings, combined with the theory about mammalian life history evolution, indicated that the provisioning role played by grandmothers might explain the evolution of human longevity. So now I'm delighted to welcome Kristen to the screen to share her presentation.
Kristen's video takes over in the top right. She waves.
Thank you, Briana. Am I there?
You are on screen. You just need to now share your presentation.
Okay, let's see. Share screen. Where's my... It says it's your screen. Sorry, folks. I'm
That's okay.
Removed from poolbar. Where is my chance to wait? No. All I can see, I'm apologies that my...
That's all right. Is your
my
PowerPoint
screen
open?
share thing says share settings, which is weird. I actually want to share my screen. Share screen.
Is your PowerPoint open yet?
I can open it.
That would be step one, and then you can share it. Perfect.
But the problem is, are you seeing it?
Nope, not yet.
Well, as long as I'm showing it, I can't see you. So I'm afraid I need... Oh, wait. Yeah. When I want to share screen, sorry, folks, someone else is sharing. You can request multiple presenter sharing for this webinar. Replace current share. Maybe that works.
Yes, that's it. That's
Okay.
your button.
Okay. Share.
The presentation opens.
Hooray.
Oh, here
Perfect.
we go.
There you go.
Okay. So apologies to everybody.
Now
And
you just need to go to, that's it. You're all set. Thank you.
right. And thanks for the introduction, Briana.
The slide displays a photo of Jane Goodall on the top left, a cover of a book titled The Chimpanzees of Gombe. Patterns of Behavior by Jane Goodall, year 1986, on the lower left, and a chart titled The Great Apes. Evolution and Phylogeny Overview on the right. The chart shows branching genera under the hominids category and shows that genus Pan, chimpanzee, and genus Homo, human, are on the same branch under hominid. Text. Jane Goodall identified features we share and features that distinguish us from our closest living cousins.
I'm just so delighted to be here. And if you are all seeing my screen, those of you that are interested in human evolution, I hope you know that Louis Leakey was smart enough to get Jane Goodall to go and pay attention to how life works if you're a chimpanzee. And she, in the 1960s, identified all kinds of features that we share with chimpanzees and a bunch of things that we don't. And she published them in various places before, but in her 86 book, all of this stuff that I'm going to quote is there. She didn't know then what we know now about our phylogeny, that we all, us and the living great apes, we all belong to the same family. So this phylogeny is really important, and it's the genetics that's shown us that.
Pictures of chimpanzees cradling baby chimpanzees appear on the left.
But what she identified for chimpanzees, that mothering is this independent thing. A mom is moving along, feeding herself, carrying the baby, and it depends on her milk. But it actually the baby starts feeding itself solid food by its first birthday and becomes an independent feeder at weaning. And that's the case for all the other members of our living family of hominids, except, of course, that's not the case for us.
A black and white photo shows a Hadza hunter, wife, and kids standing in front of a grass hut. To the lower left, a chimpanzee brain and human brain are compared, with the human brain roughly double the size of the chimpanzee brain.
And the favored story has long been that what happened in our evolution was animals became a much better way to make a living. And so the hunting hypothesis assumes that ancestral males started hunting, going forth, getting big prey, and then bringing home the bacon to mom and the kids so she could pile them up. And so instead of this independent one at a time thing, all of these close birth intervals characterize us. Well, Goodall had pointed out that actually chimpanzees hunt, and males hunt more than females do. But most of the meat is eaten by the males. There's no paternal provisioning. And so the story underlines how it's really brains, our big brains, that are behind the human story, that having these bigger brains, we could learn more, and ancestral hunters could be more effective at getting large prey, and therefore all of the things I just talked about with the hunter. And these Hadza folks I'm using to exemplify this, we're going to talk about the Hadza quite a bit, this Hadza hunter, his wife, and all those kids, and there he is with his tools, but he's claiming her and those kids.
New slide. A map on the left shows South America, with the central country Paraguay featured. A photo on the right shows people walking through waist-tall grasses towards a jungle with large packs on their backs.
Well, when we started this project in South America, I was so lucky to have this opportunity, and my students at the time, Kim Hill, Magdalena Hurtado, Hillard Kaplan, we all had the opportunity to actually spend time with people who were living on wild foods. These Aceh folks in eastern Paraguay, they know how to do it. So we could actually hang out with them and see how it works and develop a quantitative picture of what was going on.
New slide. A photo shows a person handing a man in a jungle food. The man holds a toddler in his lap.
And what we learned was that the guys who are better hunters, they spend more time at it. And whoever gets the big animal always definitely gets the credit, but he doesn't own the meat. He doesn't even distribute the meat. And his wife and kids don't get any special share. So what the heck? what's up here? And it is not the case here that men's foraging is paternal provisioning. So is the fitness-related benefit something about reputations? After all, everybody does know. Well, then I was so lucky to be invited by Nick Blurton-Jones, then at UCLA, to join him in a project in northern Tanzania.
New slide. Text. Hadza foragers. On the top left is a map of Africa, featuring northern Tanzania on the lower right coast. A close-up of the area shows the Serengeti Plain, Olduvai Gorge, and Laetoli, near a large crater and Lake Eyasi. On the right are several photos of African wildlife including zebras, giraffes, lions, and hyenas. In the bottom right is a photo of a man standing on the plain shading his eyes, looking out to the horizon.
Me and Jim O'Connell, who had also come to the University of Utah, a Paleolithic archaeologist, the three of us all had slightly different burning questions that we were so eager if Hadza folks would let us hang out with them. Because this is a part of the world where there's this deep record of our history in the fossils and the archaeological record, because the Hadza country is just right on the edge of the Serengeti, and it's right. Laetoli is just across the lake with the footprints. The Olduvai Gorge is so close, and all those absolutely amazing, enormous herbivores that's where they hang out, and all of the carnivores that compete for those big animals are there, and that's where Hadza folks know how to actually manage all of these opportunities, and where O'Connell could watch the formation of the archaeological record.
New slide. Photos show the Hadza people butchering a giraffe, and another large animal on the right at butchering stands out in the field, and sitting together eating on the left in a residential base, with a more rocky and hay or dried grass landscape.
So because it was his focus, he recorded what happened to every single big animal that was taken during our stays. What happened at the kill site? What happened when things came to the residential base? How all of the things that happened to the faunal record.
New slide. A photo shows a group of Hadza men sitting on a giraffe carcass with spears and bows and arrows.
And these guys are amazing, successful at hunting and aggressive scavenging. And because the animals are so big, if we take the long-term average, they're twice as successful as the Aceh guys are. But, with something this size, you can't say, I think I want a kilo of giraffe. Well, you have to take the whole thing. And so it is this bonanza. I mean, a giraffe is a ton of meat.
Another photo shows a line of Hadza men and women carrying meat wrapped in packs on their backs.
And so everybody comes to the kill site except the littlest kids and eats as much as they can. And Hadza folks arriving there say, "Where's mine?" And everybody eats as much as they can, but there's so much that they also carry it away. So these guys have these powerful bows and arrows, but when we look at the failure rate, they're not successful 5% of the days, and they go every day. And so if we look at the average chance of capturing, these guys hit only once a month.
Text. Average capture chance 3.4% hunter day.
Well, that's no way to feed the kids. And because what we were doing was trying to record what everybody did. I mean, people were so generous and let us hang out and do that.
New slide. A photo on the left shows heads of women carrying baskets piled high with foodstuffs on their heads. A photo on the right shows women and children sitting and eating in a group. Two photos in the upper right show chimpanzees eating fruits. Text. Eating every day?
And so in contrast with what's going on with the other great apes, what goes on among the Hadza and was going on, James Woodburn started working there in the 50s. He reported all of this stuff, but didn't quantify it. That's what we were doing. And what happens is the women and kids, they go off and forage and eat all kinds of stuff at the acquisition site.
Two photos show heads of children working with tools. Text. Children too small for staple savanna foods depend on mom until she has a baby.
But especially for the thing that is staple around the year in this savanna environment, the kids are just too little to be able to acquire enough to feed themselves. And people were wonderful and let us weigh them. And so I wish we'd done more of it, but we ended up with a sample that showed that it was the mom's work that was the crucial thing for the weight gains of the kids until she had a new baby. And then she's got something else going on. And although women continue to forage as this woman in the photograph is, her son is, waiting for mom to, provide food for him, but she's got that little one. And then when mom has a new baby, that correlation between kids' weight changes and mom's work went away, and then the correlation was with their grandmother's work.
A photo shows older heads of children standing around a grandmother as a mother with a baby in a sling sits nearby.
So there you can see a woman who has a new baby and her mother is preparing her tools to go to work, and there are the grandkids eager for grandma to go forth and make sure they get well fed.
Another photo shows several children gathered around a grandmother and a mother holding a baby nearby. A graph on the left shows time spent on the x-axis and nutrition, energy, gained on the y-axis, with a steep S-curve that rises sharply from 6, 2 to 8, 7.
So what we were seeing in such contrast to what goes on with our great ape cousins is if ancestral populations were depending on these savanna foods, the little kids can't do it. Adults can get predictable daily rates on these plant foods, especially these underground storage organs, these deeply buried tubers. And because of the way you get them, you do better if you're digging next to somebody else because they help open the hole, and you do it in batches. And even more so if you're cooking them, because a single fire, you can cook all kinds of stuff on that fire. So the women who were past their fertile years, they were continuing to get rates just as high as the women in their childbearing years. So they were adding foods to these piles, but they weren't adding new stomachs. And their work was subsidizing the dependence of the still fertile women so they could have the next baby sooner. And Goodall had actually laid out all these pieces so long ago. she pointed out that this is a quote from her 86 book, mothers of youngsters in their 4th or 5th years refuse requests for items that the child can acquire himself. Some consistently refuse to share with a 3-year-old, even those foods that are virtually impossible for the child to obtain otherwise. So she had seen that's actually what's going on.
2 horizontal bar graphs appear showing ages for chimpanzees on the left and humans on the right, with percentage of female population along the x-axis. The chimpanzee graph falls from around 22% at age 0 to 4 to about 1% at age 45 to 49, while the human population falls from about 17% at age 0 to 4, hits around 6% at age 45 to 49, and 1% at age 75 to 79.
And she had said in her 86 book, I think old age begins at about 33, and very few survive to be placed in that category. And this is showing models of the female half of the age structure for chimpanzees on the left and for humans with lots of folks, modern people representing us. But the mortality is much higher if you are living a foraging life than the ones that we live. But what you can see there is each one of these bars is a 5-year age class, and that's the fraction of the female population in that age. And there you can see for the chimpanzees, the orange bars are the juveniles. They haven't reached adulthood yet. They haven't had a baby. The green bars are the fertile years. And then very few live past the fertile years. But look at the human side. Again, the orange bars are the girls. The green bars are the adult women who are still fertile. And those golden years, those are the postmenopausal female, of whom I am one. And in all of the human populations we know anything about, there's a big fraction of the female population that is post-fertile. So this sets up our version of a grandmother hypothesis, that is what the subsidies that came from the older women favored increased longevity.
Another chart compares male and female human foragers versus chimpanzees in the same age brackets. The male and female human charts are roughly the same up until about 50, labeled menopause, and then the male percentages are smaller. The chimpanzee graph mirrors the same change with smaller percentages of males in the older chimpanzee age brackets.
And then I was so lucky to have Peter Kim, a mathematical biologist, get interested in the question. And, boy, do we pay attention to the paleoanthropological record, the fossils, and the paleoarchaeology. But, we don't really have a time machine, and that's where mathematical modeling is so important. And Peter, his specialty, agent-based models, was interested in, could it really happen that way? And so building models in which the assumptions that we were making were running the show. And here now we've added the male side of the age structure. And of course, because we are sexual reproducers, everybody has a mother and a father. And as longevity increases in females, it also increases in males. But as is true for mammals in general, females get all the cells that are going to become eggs early in life. We get it while we're still a 5-month-old fetus, and then lose half of them before we're born, keep losing them through the early years, keep losing them before menarche, lose them while we're cycling, lose them if we're pregnant, lose them if we're lactating. And then there are few enough that they no longer run our menstrual cycles. And that's when fertility ends and eventually we reach menopause. Male mammals continue to produce new sperm throughout adulthood. And so what's happened is the fertile ages shift from what they are in most mammals, including chimpanzees, female biased. They are male biased in us. And that male bias means there's all that competition out there, which means that if you can claim a female and defend your claim of her, you end up with more offspring than if you go for a paternity and then go for another one somewhere else. And so what evolutionary life history theory does is what Darwin did.
A chart of life history trade-offs shows a Venn diagram with soma intersecting with mating and parenting, with reproduction in the middle. Branches from soma lead to growth, maintenance, repair. Branches from mating lead to mate competition, male-male competition, armaments, and mate choice, female choice, ornaments. Branches from parenting lead to offspring quantity and offspring quality. Another circle detached from the rest is titled Inclusive Fitness and points to the parenting section.
It's amazing what he was able to do in the middle of the 19th century, recognize that it's all about producing descendants, and where you are and what you do already shapes what's possible, so phylogeny really matters. But there is a trade-off between more going into the adult apparatus, well, growing it in the first place and then keeping it maintained and repaired, and what goes into reproduction. And reproduction is, well, parenting is one part of it, and certainly he talked about that. But competing with what goes into parenting is what goes into competing for mates. In fact, he saw that was so important that he talked about it even before The Origin. He talked about it in The Origin, but it was important enough that he wrote a separate book about it and talked about the role of sexual selection and how important it is. Now, so those two things are competing with each other. More into one means less into the other. That's what these trade-offs are all about. And one of the things that Darwin didn't understand was actually how inheritance works. And within the 20th century, the recognition now being able to actually see chromosomes and recognize that it's reproduction of genes, now the recognition of the importance of inclusive fitness, as W.D. Hamilton recognized, and Hamilton's words were that he talked about inclusive fitness, pointing out that the parent-offspring relationship is just a special case of something more general. The parents got their genes from their parents, and so we can actually calculate the shared genes beyond parents and children, and what then ends up getting into the next generation is not just what comes from parenting and mating, but what comes from inclusive fitness.
A line graph is titled Sexual Conflict over Longevity, with adult life expectancy along the x-axis ranging from 10 to 50. There are 3 pairs of lines, 2 blue, 2 sex fitness landscape, 2 yellow, female fitness landscape, and 1 green, male fitness landscape, with a solid line for with grandmothering and a dashed line for without. The yellow and blue dashed peak at 22, the yellow solid peaks at 30, the blue solid peaks at 38, and the green solid continues to rise past 50. There is no green dashed.
And the interest then in the sexual conflict that this created in our ancestors, that Peter Kim and his students and postdocs, I'm so glad, who have these mathematical abilities worked on. And Matthew Chan took that problem and used mathematical tools to be able to depict, so we could look at the fitness landscape and look at adult life expectancy. That's on the horizontal axis, and showing what happens if we got 2 sexes, or if we just consider the female landscape, fitness landscape alone, or the male fitness landscape alone. And as you can see, that green arrow is showing the male fitness landscape. And if you're male, because you're continuing to produce sperm, and there's always a chance that you'll get another paternity, and therefore greater longevity is always advantageous on that side. If we talk about the 2-sex fitness landscape without without those subsidies of dependence coming from grandmothers, then the dotted line is showing adult life expectancy looking like what is the case for in chimpanzee communities. If we consider with grandmothering and we just look at the female side, then that arrow in the middle shows what would be the optimum. And yeah, increased longevity counts, but really it's the conflict, the males pulling for greater longevity that push the two-sex fitness landscape up to where that blue bar is, which is what it looks like in human populations who are living in under the mortality regimes of hunting and gathering.
A slide shows two books on the left titled Ache, Life History, The Ecology and Demography of a Foraging People by Kim Hill and Magdalena Hurtado, and Demography and Evolutionary Ecology of Hadza Hunter-Gatherers by Nicholas Blurton Jones. Two line graphs on the right show age-specific fertility rates of Ache men and women on top and Hadza men and women on the bottom, with the Hadza peaking earlier around 30 and the Ache peaking later around 40, both with males higher than females after 50.
And here are some data, some actual data showing exactly that. Here we talked about the Ache, and this is from Hill and Hurtado's wonderful book looking at Ache life history, in which, and Nick Blurton Jones, Hadza, looking at that case, and these are figures they both provide in which and I've lined them up so that the ages match. And of course, what you can see in the red arrow, that's where female fertility is essentially zero. And so all those males in older ages are still getting paternities, and the males can't have any more offspring, any more paternities than there are babies. So they're competing with the young guys. And to the extent they succeed, and the figure shows they do, that brings down the age-specific fertility of the younger males. They are being dominated by the older guys.
Photos of the Hadza and African predators return, with the male-female age range chart.
And if we go back to the Hadza example, where these guys taking these big animals, taking them away from lions and hyenas, in our data set, in O'Connell's recording all of these cases, almost 2/3 of the large carcasses that were taken, there were lions and hyenas on the carcass, and the Hadza hunters always succeeded in driving them off. And so the story is known to everybody. Hunting reputations, being good at that, really matters, especially to the other guys.
Two new graphs with best fit lines and curves in scatter plots appear, with cumulative offspring for Ache men in the forest by age on top and number of offspring for Hadza men by age on the bottom. The top graph has a line that continues up to the right until age 80, with about 13 paternities at a fairly steady slope. The bottom graph has a curve that rises fairly steadily until about 65, with about 6 paternities, then falls.
And so if we look at the cumulative paternities by age in both the Ache and the Hadza cases, well, you see, again, the ages on the horizontal axis and female fertility ending before 50, essentially the average ending before 50, and those old guys who are getting paternities, those are paternities the young guys do not get. They're being dominated by the older guys. And so you see all those guys in ages where you might expect them to be married and having babies, they're getting zero because the older guys, they are deferring to the older guys.
Another graph shows the fraction of Hadza people married at around 0.8 at age 16 for women, about 0.8 at age 22 for men. Then women falling off after 50 but men remaining roughly steady. A second graph shows the average hunter with a several years longer gap in the time to remarry than expert hunters.
And Nick looked more closely at this with his Hadza data. So took him a long time to do all these analyses. But if you look at the top figure, what is true for both of these ethnographic cases everybody gets married, but the marriages are very rarely lifelong, and they break up all the time. And so actually analyzing what's going on with that has been part of the work that we've done together. But as you can see in the top figure, through those fertile ages for women, about 20% of them are still not. There are periods when they're not married, so their marriage has broken up. Then as their fertility is ending, well, then it's less likely they'll be married. But those old guys are still getting married, and especially the guys who have reputations as really good hunters. And the bottom figure shows that for what Nick has tabulated is how long it takes after a breakup to get married again. And what he found was that the guys with the reputations, when their wives' fertility is ending, that marriage is likely to break up and they marry a younger wife. And when the breakups happen throughout their adulthood, they tend to marry again much more quickly and marry a younger wife. So they spend most of their adulthood married to a fertile woman, and they end up having more babies. They have higher reproductive success, not because their kids survive better, but because they have more of them.
Two photos show the Hadza family from before and a group of seated Hadza men.
So we got this picture in which the male bias mating sex ratios are favoring mate guarding, and hunting reputation earns the tendency for other men to defer. I don't want that guy as an enemy. I'd like to have him be on my side. So if he's making a claim on her, I back off.
Two photos show groups of Aceh men preparing tools.
And so we got mate guarding, and then this thing about reputation building, and the old guys are always going to be ahead. I mean, some of them don't get hotshot reputations, but some of them do. And those guys run the show. And so patriarchy is really part of this recurrent thing about us, is from this perspective built into our life history. Those Hadza guys, those Aceh guys, and then the Al Yara guys. This is Central Australia. And once again, it's the old men and what they do that absolutely keeps the universe ticking over. Where did this reputation thing come from? Why is that such a big deal?
A slide shows several photos of orangutans, gorillas, bonobos, and chimpanzees around the hominid family tree, which also includes humans.
Well, we have to go back from this perspective to this contrast that Goodall had, already laid out for us, and accumulating data has just shown more and more of it, that for the other living hominids, the mothering is independent, and the nursing babies start feeding themselves. We have quantitative data for all of them. They start feeding themselves by their first, they're still depending on our milk, but by their first birthday.
A photo of a human baby appears with the text, "Not us."
Well, if I had a baby here to show you, you would, but the picture will do. Not the case for us. So from this perspective, our ancestors were drawn to these savanna foods that youngsters can't manage, but grandmothers can. And so the females who are aging slightly more slowly could subsidize the dependents more, and that would mean shorter birth intervals and slower development, because if you are developed more slowly and end up getting bigger, then you can put more into babies, and those things are all favored by slower aging.
Two photos show kids listening to their pregnant mother's stomachs.
But the intersection of those two things, slower development and shorter birth intervals, has crucial consequences from this perspective. That next baby, while the other one is still so not able to manage things on its own, And that has crucial consequences for mothers that primatologist Sarah Bluffer-Hurdy started talking about in 1999, made such a case for this. Same thing in her 2009 book, Mothers and Others.
2 photos show human moms with multiple small children. Sarah's 1999 book is titled Mother Nature.
One of the things that characterizes humans is this stacking of dependence, making us, she said, sometimes almost like litter bearers. So these two things happening together, I mean, the trade-offs for mothers are way more complicated, but what's crucial is what the consequences are for infants, as Hurdy noted in more than a quarter of a century ago, that here are infants who are completely unable to actually manage on their own. Mom is now got some other stuff to do. And so if I don't draw her back or somebody, that's curtains for me. So selection is so strong on the capacities of infants to engage somebody. Mom, come back.
The cover of the book, Mother Nature, Maternal Instincts and How They Shape the Human Species, appears along with photos of mothers with infants and small children.
Somebody else, am I not so cute? Don't you? This thing about our infants being altricial, that's what we recognize. They are so helpless socially.
Several more book covers featuring babies stack up. Mothers and Others, Costly and Cute, The Philosophical Baby, The Scientist in the Crib, and How Infants Know. Text. Priority to Reputations, Own and Others.
They're so precocious. And it's a thing that's interested developmental psychologists. You know, those are the amazing contributions on the book covers on the right are, I like especially Vasudevi Reddy's characterization in her book of how flirtatious human infants are. This social precocity, really caring about, am I not so cute? And let's see, what about you? And this reputation becoming so important, the social relationships so important already in infancy.
A drawing of a female gorilla holding a female mouse lemur.
And so, oh boy, let's look at all the things that are associated with these shifts. Our order, primates, includes this wide diversity in body sizes. You know, gorillas, the biggest, and those little mouse lemurs, the smallest. And that female gorilla grows 10 years to get to be that big before she has her first baby. That little mouse lemur, by the time it's 1 year old, it's starting to have lots and lots of babies. The body size of gorillas is 1,000 times bigger than that little mouse lemur, and the brain size is bigger for the gorilla, but it's only 250 times the size. So what's going on there?
A line graph appears with a scatter plot, with body weight on the x-axis and brain weight on the y-axis. Primate dots fill the scatter plot, and a line below the dots for non-primate mammals rises at a steady slope. Sapiens erectus are at the top right of the graph, titled Encephalization Quotient, which equals brain weight observed over brain weight average for body weight.
And already in the 60s, Harry Jarrison was so interested in what is going on with being smart and brains and so on. And this is a figure from his often reprinted 63 paper, in which he's showing the relationship between the logged body weight on the horizontal axis, brain weight on the vertical axis, and the line there is other mammals, not primates. But then the primates are brain size is bigger than the average mammal. And, you know, he was paying attention to that. And, we're kind of a smart, aren't we? A kind of a smart order. And he talked about what we should pay attention to is maybe if you're bigger, you have to have a bigger brain to run that bigger body. But the part that's extra that could be a measure of intelligence. And so he talked about what he called encephalization quotient, the brain weight that you observe in a species relative to the brain weight for a mammal of that same size, the average mammal. And that the intelligence is a measure, the encephalization quotient is a measure of intelligence. And Jerrison noticed that as you look across these mammal brains, the bigger the brain is, the larger fraction of it is neocortex. Well, that is considered to be what was really going on in the standard story about our evolution. This bigger brain was favored, learning more, and then ending up being a more effective hunter, made all these other things possible. That's the standard story.
A paper titled Translating Time Across Developing Mammalian Brains by Barbara L. Finley appears on the left. Text. Neuroembryonic events. Same structures, over 100,000-fold size difference.
Well, Barbara Finlay started, she's a cognitive neuroscientist, and she started paying attention to this. And in 95, she and Richard Darlington published a paper in which they pointed out that the size of brain structures varies so much. What must be going on across development has to be important. And in their 95 paper, they showed that for the sample they had then, the rate of development is what determines brain size, but you have to start at conception. A lot of stuff has happened before birth, and besides, birth moves around among mammals. We could talk about that. But the developmental order is what determines the size of a structure. The largest increase is in the structures that are born late, because there are all those stem cell turnovers, more cells, and when they differentiate, then that structure is bigger.
A line graph with maturational progress on an event scale on the x-axis and days post-conception. Log scale on the y-axis is titled Brain Growth in Relation to Weaning. It shows lines for several primates and non-primates with weaning marked on the lines, and the human line is on top with weaning around 1. While the chimpanzee and orangutan lines are below humans, with weaning at 1.4 and 1.5.
So, paying attention to days post-conception, and now all that's logged, and boy, the correlation between these events in brain development is just astonishingly tight. And what is striking, well, among the things striking about that is how early our babies are weaned in relationship to brain development. And as Barbara Finlay said in 2019, the belief that our neocortex is exceptional, that's the way human exceptionalism, our big brains, crown of creation, these are her words. That has caused both neuroscientists and psychologists to prematurely assign functions distributed widely in the brain to the cortex, and to, this is the payoff part, to neglect genuinely novel features of human infancy and childhood.
The baby book covers return, along with photos of Hadza children in groups and photos of Hadza grandmothers with children.
And so, from the perspective I'm talking about, this priority to the social, the importance of social relationships begins so early. That's more important than anything. It starts out in infancy. It continues lifelong. One of the things that can account for is this tendency, let's see, am I doing it right? How do I fit in here? Okay, is this the right way? This is how we do it. Okay, that's us, not them. And so we get this us versus them thing that's so powerful and makes us dangerous to each other, as well as everything else on the planet. But it also gives us this pleasure we get in connecting, in mutual understanding, in feeling as though we're together on the same team with a common purpose. from the perspective I'm talking about, it's those, well, the Hadza grandmothers that eventually made clear how important this was in our evolution. That's what brings us together here. I hope that I can be clear enough that you can see from my perspective how these pieces fit together. So please, I am eager to learn what you think doesn't work, what wasn't clear. Comments, please.
Text. Questions, comments, complaints, please. The presentation slides end and the speaker's videos take up the full screen as they talk.
Fantastic, Kristen. Thank you. Wonderful. That was amazing. And I'm going to go ahead and jump in with some behind the scenes questions to start with, actually. And so one of our behind the scenes team questions is, at what point, if you have a sense in human evolution, do you think that there was a shift from a more chimpanzee-like life history to a more modern human-like life history? Do you think it was sort of a gradual process? Do you see like stepwise, anything like that?
Well, again, it depends on which part of the evidence you look at. But one of the things that characterizes Homo erectus, big Homo, is getting into all these environments all over the temperate world. In other words, those guys were effective at surviving in the kinds of environments in which the babies couldn't feed themselves. So that seems like such a major signal, as well as the increase in body size. Brain size increases too. So all of those pieces in big Homo are features that make it look, from the perspective I'm talking about, very much like that's the way those folks were managing the world, has real similarities with what happened in, if we want to talk about modern sapiens.
Okay, excellent. Here's a question from Niels, who asks, how does the development of social communication and language fit into your model?
What a great question, because of course, here I am hoping that language is working in this communication. And this is, again, I'm standing on Sarah Hrdy's shoulders, her identifying how much this kind of intimate activity between infants and babies in us, in contrast to what we see in the other great apes, is all about trying to link, and that seems like the very context in which using verbal ways to communicate is something that begins to be favored. And Hrdy has written a lot about similarities in babbling and so on with, for example, the other, quote, cooperative breeders in our radiation. But those are those little New World monkeys, and that's a very different set of aspects of phylogeny that's associated with them.
Excellent, thank you. Here's a question from Diane who says, wow, the Hadza was a great sample, but how does that reflect in modern society? Is there a connectivity via social networking, more than one-on-one interaction between grandmothers and grandchildren? And she says decreasing birth rate may be one point to consider.
So, Diane, thanks for the question. I mean, I've often entertained the idea that what we call the demographic transition, and I, have written about some of these things, but that it could be all this dispersion, and you don't have grandmother around, and therefore what happens is parities really go down. Short birth intervals still characterize us. Often when I talk about this and how one of the features that goes with our phylogeny that actually Sarah Hrdy pointed out is this male infanticide, that you get males knocking off the babies under particular circumstances that is explained by natural selection, that by killing this little one, you will advance the time that mom could have another one. And if this one isn't yours, and the chances are you'll get that next one, then selection's going to favor that. And she talks about the counter strategy, therefore, is to spread the possibility of paternity widely. So what gets called by very negative labels, she talks about in a lot of contexts, that's being assiduously maternal. What you're doing is reduce the chances, increase the chance of survival of your kids. But there are people who have looked at the role that mothers play for women when they're having babies in our context. Robin Dunbar and some of his collaborators looked at cell phone connections,
Yeah.
in which a woman who is just having a new baby, and boy, is she talking to her mom about now. When the demographic transition, I'm sorry about this. I always too many things at once, but that when you don't have grandmother right there, which is characteristic of the Hadza, then that means that you really can't. You have to wait, and so we do see, and I could show you how this decline in parities in numbers of babies that women have, that can be associated with this dispersion of relatives. So one of the things that's weird about our socioecology with real negative consequences, but they're the positive ones that we choose, is living in these separate nuclear families. The door is shut, picket fence around. We not even sure the kids should go out and play with the neighbors. And so it puts so much load on those particular relationships. And in the kind of socioecology that characterizes the Aceh or the Hadza or other face-to-face societies, there are all these other folks, you're not getting along with mom, and there are lots of other women, Anyway, so the conflicts of interest, something that Sarah Hrdy really underlined, conflicts of interest really start. If I were pregnant, some of dad's genes would be in that baby. And so me and that imagined fetus, actually our fitness interests are not perfectly aligned. Those conflicts of interest are everywhere. And that shapes social life.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to ask one of our behind the scenes questions now. Do you think the influence of grandmothering has had a different impact on traditionally matrilineal versus patrilineal groups?
I think the data show that depending on which one you pick, yes, that if we are, these are data from these European family history things, that one of the things, if the ownership of stuff is in the patriline and women are marrying in, then the view of dad's mom is that incomer, she's replaceable, so work her to a nubbin, right? We don't care very much about her. And things are different in the matrilineal belt. So there are places where your membership in something and your claim to all kinds of things depends on your matrilineal lineage, and we have lots of really good ethnography. I mean, I'm tempted to tell stories about Malinowski and trying to explain to his Trobriander friends when he was interned in the Trobriands during the First World War, trying to explain sexual reproduction. And it's their dad he's the source of half. Well, Malinowski probably didn't say half, but as he sat on the porch, couldn't leave because of the war, and he would try to explain to his Trobriand colleagues, and their matrilineal affiliation is crucial. And the guys would say, you can't be serious. I see those kids, they're having sex and the girls don't get pregnant. One guy said, I was away for 2 years, and when I came back, my wife had a baby. Yeah, I mean, the data are not consistent with the story you're trying to persuade me of. This is a thing. How do we know about stuff that we don't experience directly. Sometimes, we see the same thing. Actually, our eyes see the same thing and we don't even quite see it the same. But, think about how we know about how babies are produced. It takes one haploid gamete from mom and another haploid gamete from dad to form that diploid zygote. Well, none of us have ever seen that with our naked eyes, except in now assisted reproduction, where through a microscope you can do some of those things. But anyway, the accumulated evidence is we rely on, and we're always trying to accumulate more and figure out how we can test hypotheses we have about the topic today, which is human evolution.
Thank you. My next question is from Tad behind the scenes, who says, Dr. Hawkes, you've talked much about hunting excellence and status, but I didn't hear you talk about status acquired by not killing animals, but killing other humans in situations of tribal conflicts and warfare. Does that figure into your hypothesis, or did that simply not happen much in the pre-Neolithic ages?
Well, this is a contested topic. Is it Todd? I'm sorry if I'm not getting your name right.
Tad.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, it's a contested topic, but many lines of evidence show absolutely that intergroup competition has been a very big deal, and this. Being on the same side with your allies has clearly been so important in what we can see in ourselves in living people. But the story that I'm telling, that is part of what goes with the evolution of our life history. Actually, we can see versions of something like this in our closest living relatives, chimpanzees. Bonobos don't do this as much, although the males, now the data show agonistic interaction among the males is actually high among bonobos. But no question that in our modern human radiation, this competition for stuff has been really important, and it has often included, you want to kill the enemy. This whole thing about being on the same team and feeling like you're on the same team, and we feel so good about that, and that can mean well, I don't know. We're all enjoying the Olympics and we feel something about being on the same team, but it can also mean those guys are somebody else, and therefore whatever you do to them, is okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So here's a question from Urate, who says, wow, great talk. Could you just review the info on the slide with brain weaning growth versus weaning? So I think like brain size increase and then time of weaning.
Right. Well, I could show the slide, but what that slide shows for a whole bunch of mammals, a bunch of primates, and a bunch of non-primate mammals is from conception. So this has been a crucial thing that Finlay and her collaborators have emphasized, that the birth sort of moves around. So you really have to start at conception. All kinds of stuff is happening then. And actually, when birth happens is really going to, if you're, say you're a wildebeest mom, that baby is going to have to run across the savannah as soon as it's, almost as soon as you drop it. And so this thing about exactly when birth happens and these other aspects of development are negotiated between what mom can do, what the baby can do, and so on. Selection on both sides, conflicts of interest. But what that figure shows is this maturational progress scale that Finlay and her collaborators have developed that now includes 271 features of neurodevelopment, of neurogenesis. And the thing that their inquiries have found, I think when they started out, they kept thinking, we can't be right. Let's get another taxon and measure another thing. And they just kept accumulating data that were consistent with the brains of us and other mammals are so tightly constrained, the way they develop. Think about our bodies. If we're mammals, for us, here I am doing all this stuff, but there are mammals that have fins, there are mammals that have hooves, there are bodies. Now, I am building on other folks, recognizing that the slower you are in developing, the bigger you are, yes, for body growth. But what's going on with brains is so constrained, the order in which things happen if you're going to have a mammal brain. And what that figure shows is that if you log these post-conception days, you get a straight, this is a thing, about how if something is slower than what is happening, and so we would really see a curve here, things are happening slower in us. If that's logged, then we get a straight line. And what they have shown is that these things are so tightly correlated, this order of development across their sample of mammals. So, like 0.99 more nines, these are all so tightly correlated. So what that's showing is that's what the lines are. It's logged post-conception days on the vertical axis. And then the thing I was highlighting was in the sample so far was chimpanzee and orangutan weaning age. Orangutans, it's amazing that we still have them, because, wow, their intervals are so long. They are weaned so late. Anyway, and then, these things are always tricky because we're talking averages and depends on the sample. But weaning ages for foraging populations are, on average, right about 3, whereas for chimpanzees, it's 5 and longer, and then 7 and even longer for orangutans. Holy Toledo. And then they've already started feeding themselves before they're weaned. Not so for our babies. So that little weaned kid is still really not able to do very much for itself, so dependent on somebody subsidizing that kid. And that is the thing that this whole grandmother hypothesis perspective really underlines as the fundamental source of this very thing I'm trying to be clear about. So we get to realizing that this wanting to communicate, the social getting clear about, are we on the same page, is so important to us. Whereas, if we were chimpanzees, we sure wouldn't be doing this.
Then we could probably say that about a lot of things. So all right, we're almost out of time. I have one more question to ask, behind the scenes question. So, and I really like this one. Looking back, what made you interested in studying life history in the first place? Or was it more a matter of circumstance?
Oh, I would say I've just been so lucky. And it was, I started out as a cultural anthropologist. My dissertation fieldwork was in Highland New Guinea, not with foragers, people who are pig keepers and gardeners. And it really was the luck of coming to the University of Utah. And I was still working on my dissertation here. And anyway, this is a long story, which I have told in print, so you could read about it. But luckily, I went to a guy in the math department. Sorry, am I using the right statistics here? And he said, we got a visitor this year who kind of is interested in this stuff. You ought to try. And this guy, Watson was his name. Watson was also my dissertation supervisor, but this is a different Watson, who was actually a student of R.A. Fisher's, and he was visiting in the math department, and he was great. And I talked to him about what I was, and he said, there's a guy on the faculty here who you really ought to meet. And that's how I met Eric Charnoff, who was a theoretical biologist in the biology faculty here at the time. And Charnoff was so patient with my stupidity, and he tolerated it, and he just directed my reading. And oh my God, we can explain aging. We can explain sexes. And so anyway, I took a long postdoc, actually post-PhD by that time, and continued whenever I was here to be with Charnov and his students and in his seminars, and all the things it has turned out, all the things that he worked on. He made major contributions to foraging models. That's actually what we were after with our Aceh project in the beginning. Do these things that work for other animals, do they also work for humans when they're depending on wild food? And so life history, foraging models, sex allocation. There's so much I would say about that if only we had time. Anyway, so, lucky breaks for me at every turn. And I've just had the most amazing collaborators who have shown me how to see what I didn't realize I was looking at. So.
I love that. That's a beautiful way to wrap up about the power of collaboration and, in some sense, just chance in who you come across as an academic. So I love that.
Trying to listen.
Exactly. Yeah. So wonderful. So I'm going to conclude today's virtual program. Please join me in the audience in thanking Kristen for sharing her work with us. I'd also like to give special thanks to those who made this program possible, to our behind the scenes team who helped sort through your questions, to our donors, volunteers, and viewers like you. And finally, to all our partners who help us reach, educate, and empower millions of people around the world today and every day. We thank you. Next month, we'll be featuring paleoecologist Dr. Kay Berensmeyer from our museum, the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, on March 26th. So mark your calendars. We'll put information about that program online soon, and we'll send you information via email. So keep an eye out for that. We've put a link in the Q&A where you can find information about our other upcoming programs and how to sign up for the museum's weekly e-newsletter. That's really the best way to stay informed about upcoming programs and to learn more about the museum's research and exhibitions. After this webinar ends in a moment, you'll see a survey pop up asking for some feedback about the program. Please take a moment to respond. We're curious to know what topics you might be interested in seeing for future programs, and we appreciate your input. Again, thank you to Dr. Hawkes. Thank you to the audience, and we will see you next month.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Briana.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Logo: National Museum of Natural History, Smithsonian.